Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking 2 questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas. And his Catholic faith is day 197. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 158 and 159 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of anger and of cruelty. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10. And so here we go. Article 1, whether it is lawful to be angry. By way of review, the passions are neither good nor evil in themselves, generally speaking, excepting things like envy, so that's sorrow at another's good, that's an evil, sadness in itself. However, most of the time, passions are good or evil depending on their conformity or ill conformity with right reason. For example, if a man breaks into your house and you use anger to help fend him off, then this anger will be praiseworthy. You ought to be angry in this case. And what is anger? Anger is defined within the article as the desire for revenge. And sometimes this is a good thing. It is a desire for justice, to do right by some wrong which has occurred, making right through punishment, like a parent disciplining their child or a judge sentencing a criminal to jail, all of which are reasonable things. Provided, of course, that the avenger doesn't punish out of hatred for some person, but for some good, like the good of the state desired by the soldier, or the good of the criminal or the child in the case of the judge or parent. Therefore, it is lawful in certain circumstances to be angry. Article 2, whether anger is a sin. As we mentioned in our last article, not necessarily, but if the anger go beyond what is right, then it will be sinful, which Aquinas spells out for us here in the following words. If he desire the punishment of one who has not deserved it, or beyond his deserts, or again contrary to the order prescribed by law, or not for the due end, namely the maintaining of justice and the correction of defaults, then the desire of anger will be sinful. Article 3, whether all anger is a mortal sin. Probably an easy question to answer based on what we've covered thus far. If one's desire for vengeance be contrary to love of God and neighbor, then it will be mortally sinful. However, if one's desire for punishment be over a trifle or undue in its intensity, although this would be sinful by being unreasonable, it would not be mortally sinful unless it truly be contrary to charity, contrary again to the love of God and neighbor. Then interpreting our Lord's words, who said in the Gospel of Matthew, "You have heard that it was said to men of old, you shall not kill, and whoever kills shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother shall be liable to judgment." St. Thomas explains, our Lord is speaking here of the movement of anger wherein a man desires the killing or any grave injury of his neighbor. And should the consent of reason be given to this desire, without doubt it will be a mortal sin. So again, what that means is that anger, which wishes evil upon a man out of hatred for that man, not that good might come to him or to the state, again with the soldier example, who is simply willing the protection of his country, then this man, through wishing evil simply on another, will sin mortally. Article 4, whether anger is the most grievous sin. On the one hand, in abstract, undue anger is not as bad as undue concupiscence, since anger is pursuing a loftier good, that of justice, instead of just sensual satisfaction. It is also not as bad as hatred, which wants evil for another, simply speaking, or even envy, which wants evil for another for the sake of one's own vanity. Yet very concretely or in practice, we know anger is quite damaging in its grasp upon man, for a man can do quite quickly very terrible, unreconcilable things in a fit of rage. Yet even this aspect is not sufficient to make anger worse than sins directly against God or his church, his sacraments. Therefore, anger is not the most grievous sin. Article 5, whether the philosopher Aristotle suitably assigns the species of anger. Now, back in the 2nd volume of the Summa, we learned about the species of anger, which were named on account of being causes which can increase the passion of anger. which could be through what's called here being quick-tempered, or brooding over an injury received, what is called ill will, or brooding over the punishment one wishes to deal out, which is called rancor. However, in this article, the question we are asking is about the kinds of anger insofar as they are sinful. And in each of these causes, there can be a divergence from reason by becoming quickly incensed over a trifle, and of too great a degree of anger, or by brooding over an injury more than justice requires, or by harboring in the heart a punishment desired in a way beyond what is necessary and to the detriment of one's other actions. In this way, being quick-tempered would denote anger to an undue degree and from an undue cause, perhaps, while ill will and rancor would denote an undue duration of that anger. Article 6, whether anger should be reckoned among the capital vices. Capital vices are vices which lead to other vices by way of the desirability of their end. The goal of anger being vengeance, a kind of justice, is sufficiently seen or evidenced in human history to have a very powerful sway over men as to lead them into other acts, other vices. Aquinas gives us here two reasons why this is the case and why anger is a capital vice in the following words. The first is on the part of its object, which has much of the aspect of desirability insofar as revenge is desired under the aspect of justice, which is attractive by its excellence. The second is on the part of its impetuosity, whereby it precipitates the mind into all kinds of inordinate action. Therefore, it is evident that anger is a capital vice. Article 7, whether 6 daughters are fittingly assigned to anger. Having shown how and why wrath, let's call it, is a capital vice leading to other vices, next naturally Aquinas relates what exactly those vices are. Anger which leads to disordered thought of the offender is called indignation. If such thought be in the contemplation of the punishment to be meted out, we shall have swelling of the mind. If vicious anger spills out into disorderly, confused words, there is clamor. If in injurious words towards neighbor, there will be contumely, and if against God, blasphemy. Lastly, if it spill over into undue deeds, there will be called quarreling. And thus we arrive at the 6 daughter sins of anger, which are indignation, swelling of the mind, clamor, contumely, blasphemy, and quarreling. Article 8, whether there is a vice opposed to anger resulting from a lack of anger. The man who sees a woman being attacked on the street and feels nothing is not thereby virtuous, for anger is the passion given to man to assist him in pursuing or punishing the wicked as justice demands. Anger should serve as a strength to this hypothetical man to assist him in coming to the aid of this woman. In this man's case, the lack of anger may be sinful because either he does not perceive such a thing happening to this woman as evil, or he does not pursue avenging her, which could denote cowardice. Therefore, if an incorrect judgment or lack of virtue leads to a lack of the passion of anger, then such lack will be sinful. In a sentence from this article, he who is not angry, whereas he has cause to be, sins. For unreasonable patience is the hotbed of many vices. It fosters negligence and incites not only the wicked, but even the good, to do wrong. Moving then on to question 159 on cruelty. Article 1, whether cruelty is opposed to clemency. As vicious anger is opposed to the virtue of meekness, so too cruelty is opposed to the virtue of clemency. As is taught within this article, just as it belongs to equity to mitigate punishment according to reason, while the sweetness of soul, which inclines one to this, belongs to clemency, so too excess in punishment as regards the external action belongs to injustice, but as regards the hardness of heart, which makes one ready to increase punishment, belongs to cruelty. In other words, equity and injustice are virtue and vice in the external action of punishing, while clemency and cruelty pertain to the heart or to the passion, which is influencing such external actions. Article 2 in our last article, whether cruelty differs from savagery or brutality. The savage or brutal man is the man who punishes, inflicts injury on another without that person first having injured them. In this way, they are likened to predatory animals which kill other animals not because they were offended by them, not for the sake of justice, but for the sake of eating them. Cruelty is therefore different from savagery, brutality, because Cruelty still has justice in mind, albeit in a disordered way, while savagery and brutality is about just hurting another for the enjoyment of it. Giving the last word in our episode to St. Thomas, he tells us, brutality or savagery applies to those who in inflicting punishment have not in view a default of the person punished, but merely the pleasure they derive from a man's torture. Consequently, it is evident that it is comprised under bestiality, for such like pleasure is not human, but bestial, and resulting as it does either from evil custom or from a corrupt nature, as do other bestial emotions. And with that, we finished another episode. We have just finished covering questions 158 and 159 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of anger and of cruelty. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.